Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing one of the most exciting buffed Pokemon in the Open Ultra League, and that is Shadow Dusknoir. Shadow Dusknoir's fast move, Astonish, gets way more damage. It's now a Mud Slap clone, and it gets a true bait move, Shadow Punch, so it doesn't have to run Ominous Wind anymore. Fun fact, I ran this thing for 2 sets, not realizing that I hadn't TM'd over to Shadow Punch, so I was wondering why it didn't feel great to use, and then I ended up switching over to Shadow Punch, and it performed a heck of a lot better. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches and take a look at Shadow Dusknoir in action in the Open Ultra League. Hopping into the first match, picking up a terrible lead Cobalion versus Gengar. Safe switch into the Shadow for Alligator. Those double kicks would have been triple resisted, so there's 0 point of staying in. They land the Shadow Punch, and that does way more damage than it would have last season. Shadow Punch, of course, got a big damage boost in this balance patch. Opponent tries for the farm down. They do not get it. They go for charge attack priority. And since I know my Feraligatr has more than 1 HP remaining, I can safely shield, take the 1 HP of damage to the shield, and force either the final shield or switch advantage. My opponent there intentionally gets themselves lower. They wanted to limit farm. I get an Astonish head start with the Dusknoir. They send in Sand Slash, aggressive switch to Cobalion, and out comes Shadow Machamp. Shadow Machamp is going to be firing off a Cross Chop. I'm going to click Sacred Sword. They can Cross Chop here and deny my energy, but then I can just fully Astonish down with the Shadow Dusknoir, and that would have been fine for me. Instead, my opponent is going to commit to the farm down. I make another Sacred Sword. The Shadow Claw does not KO, which means I get to land a double kick. And from here, this is a very easy cleanup for Shadow Dusknoir. First thing to notice, those Astonishes hit incredibly hard. Shadow Dusknoir, even though it doesn't have the highest attack stat, my goodness, this thing outputs some serious damage. Down goes alolan Sand Slash, and that is a good game. But we see another terrible lead in the next match, leading Cobalion into Shadow Hippowdon. Shadow Hippowdon, a very cool pick. I bring in Feraligatr. Hippowdon is going to get some chip with Weather Ball, and then send out Tentacruel. Oh, that is so unfortunate. Tentacruel, incredibly good at neutralizing energy from Feraligatr. I'm going to get to fire off Hydro Cannon after Hydro Cannon in this matchup. Unfortunately, I'm going to fall just short of a third Hydro. A third Hydro could potentially force a shield, but I do not get there. I just can't survive. I'm going to bring in Cobalion because I know Cobalion can survive multiple Scalds. Scald does get the debuff on the first try. The good news for me is that this is probably a range where I can Sacred Sword and pick up a knockout. They're going to go for Scald number 2. I can't overfarm too much, however, because I really don't want to take a third Scald, as that would be able to knock me out. So I fire off the Sacred Sword. Sacred Sword does pick up the KO. In comes Hippowdon, and I will fire off the debuff Sacred Sword. I just need chip damage to put it in farm range for the Shadow Dusknoir. In comes the Dusknoir, and look at the Astonishes go. This is the Ultra League. Pokemon are bulky here, but Dusknoir just does not care. They're going to be able to make another move, so I may as well force a shield with Shadow Punch. They're going to be able to barely hang on and fire off one final charge attack. I'm going to let this through. Their final Pokemon in the back is their own Cobalion, and that is really unfortunate for my opponent. Due to the ghost typing here, the double kicks will do absolutely nothing. I'm going to look to farm, switch, and catch. Did we catch the Stone Edge here? This would be a catch of a lifetime. We catch the Stone Edge. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. Tough lead in the next match, Cobalion versus Shadow Dragonite. Cobalion not getting the greatest lead so far, but so far we have gotten 2 wins. I shield up the superpower, they're staying in. If they're debuffed, they have to shield. So this is a pretty safe bait for me, going for the Sacred Sword. They call the bait! Oh my goodness, I have an absolute shambles. What is that bait call? I go for another Sacred Sword. I'm able to force a shield from the opponent. They can't potentially knock me out. That would be okay, as then I can just get farm on the Shadow for Alligator. Opponent is going to switch out into Ampharos, and I actually have to stay in here. Brutal Swing would hit for big damage onto the Shadow Dusknoir, so I'm forced to stay in with the Feraligatr. Whether they go for Trailblaze or Brutal Swing, I'm fine either way. They end up going for Brutal Swing because I'm 1 off the Hydro, so even if they boosted their damage, the next Volt Switch wouldn't register, and I can pick up a knockout with the Hydro. In the back, they have a Wall Rain, and this is going to be a very interesting game. My opponent gets their Icicle Spear in 3. I get my Shadow Ball at the same time. I'm going to overfarm, predicting the catch. They try for the catch, and by not throwing my charge move to force charge attack priority, I win the game. We get the prediction right. And unfortunately for my opponent, the Astonish plus Shadow Ball damage has shredded through this poor Walrein. In comes Feraligatr, Shadow Clawing down and taking the win. Cobalion versus Pangoro. This is a good lead for the Cobalion. Opponent is staying in this matchup, and that works out nicely for me. There, I didn't actually see a Karate Chop go through. I believe they did get it, but unfortunately the visuals just didn't show them getting one, which is really unfortunate. This is a tough call to make. I shield and I get it wrong. It's the Night Slash, and now I'm going to get hit with a Close Combat. Close Combat would KO from this range, so I am going to protect the Cobalion. They're staying, so I'm going to throw one in the Sacred Sword, and if they shield, throw one and another Sacred Sword. So I will be able to win the lead versus the Panda Bear, which is quite nice. And I still have the Shadow Claw using Feraligatr and the Astonish using Shadow Dusknoir in the back. They bring in Licky. If they're bringing in Licky into a Cobalion, they have to be so weak to this in the back. So I'm actually going to save the Cobalion and just bring in the Feraligatr. I'm fine with throwing away the Feraligatr because if it's something like a Dark Poison, I need to keep Drapion alive. Licky is going to be able to fire off Body Slam after Body Slam. Honestly, to me, I was expecting more out of XL Licky and Miltank. I found it to be a little bit underwhelming, especially playing it and also playing against it. Like, the damage just really doesn't do what you would want it to do because everything is so bulky in the Ultra League. Whereas in the Great League, Body Slam, even despite the nerf, can still feel pretty effective. I make it to the Hydro Cannon. I was debating just not throwing the move and going for farm on Cobalion because it is the Dark Poison in the back. The good news for me is I'm not in Aqua Tail range. I can survive a move here. Drapion will fire off that Crunch, fishing for the debuff. They get the debuff, but trying to poison this thing down a Steel type is never going to go well. I'm going to make back-to-back Sacred Swords, get them very, very low, and then I can just switch into the Shadow Dusknoir. Astonish is resisted, but I don't think anyone told that to Dusknoir. Dusknoir is going to get the farm down before they get the double up. We've got a mirror lead, Cobalion versus Cobalion, but my opponent has the style points with the shiny Cobalion. Sacred Sword is going to connect. I wait the turn, make sure I see their double kick start so they don't get a catch. This next Sacred Sword will come down to charge attack priority. I have a high IV Cobalion, but unfortunately my opponent catches it, and they catch onto a Shadow Drifblim where it is triple resisted. What a devastating catch for my opponent. I'm going to bring in Feraligatr. Here, I probably should have gone for the Hydro. Hydro wouldn't KO, but a Hydro plus 2 Shadow Claws would have. So I should have Hydroed instead of going for the Ice Beam. The Astonishes here do so much damage. Again, Astonish is just a completely cracked move. I overfarm as much as I can, which isn't a whole lot, and I'm going to be able to pick up the knockout with the Hydro. So down goes Drifblim, in comes a Shadow Skuntank, and I fall just short of making the move. And unfortunately, my Cobalion is so low that I think I am actually going to lose this game. The Trailblaze does not KO. Opponent should have gone for a Crunch. They did boost up their damage, but in Trailblazing, they actually let me get a move there. I'm going to bring in the Dusknoir. Wait. This game actually looks winnable. If Dusknoir can Astonish down, this game will end in victory. I shield up the Crunch. Can I get the farm down? Oh my goodness. Is this 1 HP? It has to be for me to win the game. Shadow Punch is shielded, but the Skuntank had 2 HP. What an incredibly close game. If that KO'd through the shield, I could have KO'd Cobalion and taken the win. But unfortunately, by the narrowest of margins, we end up losing the game. Moving into the next match, and I get about the best possible lead and swap that I could ask for. Cobalion into Guzzlord, and a Skeletor save switch that I get to absolutely obliterate with Shadow Feraligatr. I did consider bringing in the Dusknoir, as those Astonishes would have been doing genuinely hilarious amounts of damage, but I figured that it was probably an attempt at a bait out, so I wanted to preserve Dusknoir for the endgame. I've been able to get so much damage onto this Guzzlord. Guzzlord, Brutal Swing plus the Dragon Claw will pick up the KO in the back. Oh, that is not what I was expecting. They have a non-Shadow Typhlosion. I will fire off the Shadow Punch just to put pressure on them and to force their shields. They're probably just going to go straight Thunder Punch here because these Incinerates are adding up quite a bit. But the crazy thing is that it looks like the Astonishes are almost keeping pace here. Another Astonish and another Shadow Punch thrown at the Typhlosion. Typhlosion will commit the shield. Typhlosion just gets the farm down. They have 2 moves, but the double kick will always go through. Unfortunately for Typhlosion, they feint with a Blast Burn remaining. In comes the Guzzlord, and Guzzlord will get knocked out by the Sacred Sword. Opponent, despite the hard counter, ended up making that pretty close in the endgame. There's trouble on the lead in the next match, and its name is Virizion. Virizion is a massive core breaker for the Cobalion plus Shadow Feraligatr core. So I'm forced to stay in with the Cobalion, even though I'm taking massive super effective damage, and just play it out. Every time a Sacred Sword is thrown, it is a charge attack priority opportunity. My opponent decides not to go for it though. Instead, they're just going to let me land the damage and just take a little bit of extra farm on the Virizion. Virizion will be able to pick up the knockout. Cobalion did a decent job at getting it low, and now I just bring in the Shadow Dusknoir. These Astonishes, again, just so much damage. I'm going to have to take a Leaf Blade, which will hurt, but I get a nice energy advantage. In comes a Feraligatr. This is really not great. You know what? I'm just going to full send here. Going straight for the Shadow Ball. It connects massive damage onto that Feraligatr. Feraligatr will go for the Hydro, and I'm going to let this through. The Hydro lands in the back. That is, oh my goodness, that is a Mud Slap Excadrill. And honestly, this might be a game loss for me. Mud Slap does a lot of damage. Thankfully, I'm able to get both Hydros off, but I'm really worried about getting Mud Slap down with the Dusknoir. I get as much damage as I possibly can, bring in the Dusknoir, I make the Shadow Punch. If this Shadow Punch doesn't KO, I guaranteed lose. If I take one more Mud Slap, I'm not able to win this game. Come on, Dusknoir. Shadow Punch does KO the Exca. Astonish farms down the Feraligatr. That game got way closer than it ever should have been. Mud Slap, that damage is absolutely absurd. We move to the next match, lost lead and swap, Cobalion into Shadow Machamp, and the Shadow Feraligatr answered with Ampharos. Ampharos is going to fire off its energy, and I just have to let this go. The nice thing about the new Ampharos moveset, if you're a Cobalion enthusiast, is that Cobalion is a complete wall to Ampharos' energy. However, Ampharos, with boost from Trailblaze, is still actually able to deal some pretty solid damage here. I will fire off another Sacred Sword at this Ampharos, hoping it can pick up the knockout. Ampharos barely hangs on, and unfortunately for me, they are going to be able to land that charge attack. That puts me pretty low. I should be able to get double Sacred Sword if they try and farm down. The goal, of course, getting the final shield, because Shadow Dusknoir in the 2-0 can beat just about anything in the meta. So I'll fire off the Sacred Sword, I get the final shield, in comes Shadow Dusknoir, and in the back is Licky. You have got to be kidding me. Oh my goodness, and this, despite the neutral dominance that Shadow Dusknoir can have, this is the downside of a mono ghost moveset. Oh, this is absolutely heartbreaking. All the advantage that Dusknoir could ever want in the entire world, just completely neutralized by Licky. As Licky just tanks Shadow Ball after Shadow Ball after Shadow Ball. My only hope is a catch, but all my opponent has to do is just wait, and I'm not going to get the catch. I try for the catch. It's unsuccessful. In comes Machamp. And yeah, there's just no winning this game. As a Shadow Ball still doesn't KO Licky. The Rock Slide doesn't KO. So I do actually get a farm down on 1 HP. And I get to leave with a Shadow Ball. This will be charge attack priority. But again, it's not going to KO. The Shadow Ball. I almost got through that whole Licky with nothing but double resisted moves. But unfortunately, that is the blessing and the curse of a mono ghost moveset. We move to the next match, Cobalion versus a non-Shadow Dragonite. Dragonite will fire off its energy. This is non-Shadow. I can tank a superpower. I'm going to let it go. They superpower. They stay in. Last time, an opponent called a bait here. I think it's unlikely they're going to call a bait again, so I go for the Sacred Sword, and they call the bait again! Oh my goodness. Clearly, I need to never bait a Dragonite again. Dragonite players have started calling baits. They let it go once again. They bring in Tentacruel. I'm going to bank a ton of energy, and we actually have a simultaneous switch out. They tried to catch a Stone Edge, and I just wanted to save that energy because they were clearly weak to Cobalion in the back, and then bring in Feraligatr. I could shield Feraligatr, but this This right here is the Shadow Dusknoir show. I'm going to bring in Dusknoir and look at the Astonishes go. This is an XL Registeel, one of the bulkiest Pokemon in the Ultra League, but Dusknoir consistently chipping away. The Zap Cannon does not get the debuff. I'm going for the full farm down. In comes Tentacruel, and I will go for a Shadow Punch bait. Shadow Punch bait gets called by the opponent. That is very unfortunate for me. I'm going to fire off yet another Shadow Punch. They have a ton of energy, so I'm going to wait the turn, try for a CMP sack swap, but I don't think I got it. The Stone Edge is shielded, but I didn't get it. And now it all comes down to this. A Blizzard Landing will KO. A shielded Acid Spray into a Scald will lose me the game. I shield. It is the Blizzard. Thankfully, it's not an Acid Spray into a Scald. Shadow Ball KOs the Tentacruel. Registeel gets oh so close to a charge move, but not close enough. And I'm able to take the win. All in all, I think Shadow Dusknoir is an incredibly cool Pokemon, and it's very playable in the Open Ultra League. The first 2 sets that I ran with it, I believe I did go slightly negative. And then I realized after losing to an opposing Dusknoir, I was like, wait, this thing has Shadow Punch? I was running it with Ominous Wind the first 2 sets. And I have hardly felt so foolish in Go Battle League as in that moment when I realized that I have been running a more expensive and worse charge move as my bait move. And then after switching it over to Shadow Punch, the sets went a heck of a lot better because the Astonish to Shadow Punch pacing is really, really nice, that 4-3 alternating, as opposed to having to deal with a 45 energy and 45 base damage Ominous Wind. That is just worse in every possible way. So I do think it's a very playable Pokemon. I don't think it's top meta, just purely based on the fact that a mono ghost moveset, like we saw in that game when I had a 2-0 shield advantage, they had a licky, and there was just nothing that I could do. I threw Shadow Ball after Shadow Ball, and licky didn't care. So purely from a lack of coverage aspect, I would not put it as top meta. But it's now an extremely playable Pokemon and a Pokemon that you can use to get wins. You just have to make sure that you're covering for those normals. Because if you go up against like a Dark Poison, if you're up a shield, that's actually winnable for Dusknoir, but against a normal type, you are just dead. There's nothing you can do to win that game. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support guys provide is sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.